Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sarah Gallagher. I'm a professional development specialist for demonstrated success. And I am very, very grateful and thankful for you all taking some time out of your very busy lives right now. I'd also like to thank the Department of Ed for helping partner with us and put this on. And lastly, I'd like to thank Lindsay Mitchell, who's put in all of the work for today's webinar. So today's webinar is Innovative Ideas in Remote Learning, Engaging Our Remote Learners and Strategies for Assessment. Throughout this webinar, you can ask questions at any point. My colleague Anne will be on in reading those questions. So we'll make sure that all questions are answered. And if there's anything that we cannot answer, of course, we will make sure that we find the answers and give those to you. So your mics are muted. And again, if you have questions, feel free to type those out. First, I'd like to start out by introducing Lindsay. So Lindsay is a very talented teacher. She's a high school teacher. She's been in the classroom for 13 years. She has 11 years of online experience, and she has instructional design experience. She amazingly has taught children starting from age 2 all the way to adults. I'm not sure how you did that, Lindsay. That's miraculous, really. I have a 3-year-old son, and I'm seeing that you have a rubber ducky collection, 125 of them, so he would be a huge fan of yours, for sure. And again, I'm Sarah Gallagher. It sounds funny to even say I have 20 years of education experience because I feel
you're way too young for that.
No. But I had the privilege of teaching for Boston Public School for 13 years, 13 years of amazing experiences, and so I feel very lucky. I have 3 children of my own that hopefully will be nice and quiet during our webinar today, but I'm sure you all can understand that things are a little chaotic at our homes. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Lindsay. And again, any questions? Yeah.
Can I just say something? On your control panel, everybody has a control panel on the right, or I don't know where it is on your screen, but there's a control panel. And there's a section that says questions. If you have questions, please type them in. And I know some people right now are telling me that they can't hear. I will send you the phone number, but you can, and if you can't hear me, so I'm not, why even go on? You can't hear me. If you lose connection, I will send you the phone number that you can just call in on your phone. But if you do have questions, please just type them in. If I get the same question over and over again, I will interrupt Lindsay and ask her. Otherwise, she'll every now and then go and look at the questions and answer them. But we probably won't be able to get to all of the questions today. So we will, at the end, download the questions, put them into a spreadsheet and answer them, and we'll post them for you. And it'll be there with all the rest of the documents that you will get. Okay? That makes sense, I hope?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm turning my camera off. Lindsay, it's all you.
All right, excuse me. Why, thank you. Hello, my name is Lindsay Mitchell. I am a teacher at Pinkerton Academy, and I also teach at the Virtual Learning Academy. So I'm very excited to be here, and I have 2 children as well. Hopefully they are amused quietly downstairs while we talk today. So this is our agenda for today, is we're first going to talk about engaging our learners and perhaps give you an opportunity to share any success stories or strategies you have found and to answer any questions on engaging learners. The second main item is to talk about ways to assess our learners and to share our success stories and ask any questions. So those are the main things. If we can go to the next slide. So I have 2 goals from myself as your presenter today. I'm hoping that each of you can identify at least one new way to reach my unengaged learners and determine a realistic plan to implement it. And then to identify one new way I can assess my learners and determine one group of students with whom you'd like to do it. So these are the big takeaways I'm hoping you get for today. All right, so this is the reality. You're always going to have learners who just don't want to do work. And when you do it remotely, it is going to be more challenging because you essentially cannot, nag them or remind them on a daily basis. So it is going to be harder to get your unengaged learners. The trick here is to make it easier for them to do the work than not to do the work. So this is kind of over my years of experience, I have found that there's really 5 main reasons students don't do work when it comes to remote learning. One is the technology. The second reason is they're confused about the directions. The third is they don't understand the content. The fourth is there's some emotional problems going on. And finally, motivation, or they just don't want to do it. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we figure out this problem? And one thing I feel very strongly about is starting with positive intent. And that's what you're going to hear me say a lot today, is really starting with positive intent. And the next slide. All right, so this is kind of how I suggest to figure out why your kids are not solving the problem. And this is some of the procedures we do at the Virtual Learning Academy Charter School. I do this in the classroom and I just do it online. First of all, do a triage. Once a week, kind of go through your student list and figure out, okay, who's getting behind, and just sort of make a list. The second step is to reach out by email to the student and also parent, expressing just some concern if they need help. Perhaps you choose to do this on Thursday. The other step is to also do an administrative reach out. Is this student on a 504 or an IEP, or do they just usually need some extra love and attention? That's also a good time to reach out. It's also a good time to reach out to their guidance counselors, their 504 coordinator, mainly just because there could be other things going on that you're not aware of. And this can really adapt how you approach this problem. The next is the parent call. And I suggest you pick a day where you do these. Pick a day of the week where you're just going to sit down and call the parents. And I really recommend calling the parents. I know myself calling parents, they appreciate being called. They're getting so many emails right now. And this also gives you a chance to figure out what is going on. And the final, I say, is the final administrative reach out. If you're not getting anywhere, depending on your school's procedures, you're just going to have to say, hey, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I'm not getting any traction. Personally, I have found once you get to the parent call, usually your problems diminish. Of course, you're always going to have that core group of kids, but usually following these steps really does help. All right, so this is the trick to a good email. Through the Virtual Learning Academy, one thing I can say is we really talk about building relationships. So this is the type of email I usually say, dear Johnny, I hope that you're well. I'm reaching out because I'm concerned since I have not received any work from you on days 1 and 2. I would like to know how I can help you and if you have any questions or if you're having some technology struggles. Please get back to me by whatever date you give so I can know. I'm happy to talk to you and your parent to make sure you got this message. So why does this really work? It's positive. You're saying that there could be a problem going on more than they just don't want to do it, which could be very possible. You've given a time frame and a deadline. You've said what you're going to do next, and you've also given the kid a chance. If they're legitimately confused on what to do, you've given them the opportunity to say that to you. So the big tips to a good email: keep it positive. I always personally like to start with, I guess that they're confused on what to do. It allows the kid to have a little bit of dignity and say, yeah, I didn't understand the directions. Whether they did or not, well, that really depends on the student, but it gives them a chance to say it. You always CC the parents, and these ones are good ones to save because then you can forward them to administration when you're kind of following up with them. So here's my suggestions on the parent call. Give the student a day or two to get back to you. Always follow up with an email. Be straightforward. Hold on one moment. Pardon me, allergies. Be straightforward. Ask how the parent is doing. These are stressful times for parents as well. You could have parents who are nurses, who are doctors, whose family members are sick. So also be considerate that the parent is very stressed. And I always like to say, how can I help you? Is there something we can do together? I find those kinds of sentences and phrases allow the parent to feel that I am just not getting after them because their kid is not doing work. I am talking to them because I'm concerned and I want to do everything I can to help. These kinds of words and this kinds of terminology really, really does help. And it puts us all in this perspective of this, we're a team and we're working together on this. And all right, so these are my common workarounds to the common problems that I find for kids not doing problems. If it's technology, personally, I'm for very low tech options. If you have a class that is a very unmotivated class, the more logins, the more extra steps you make them do, that's another barrier for them just simply not to do the work. Direction confusion. They don't understand what you want them to do. It happens. One thing I like to do is, my husband's not a teacher. I'll give him directions and say, do you understand what I want you to do? That is one thing I highly, highly recommend. The other one is content confusion. Give a feedback form at the end of instruction and use video screen shares to explain and offer extra help. And I'm going to pause in just a minute after this slide just to answer any questions. Emotional. Offer to adapt a few assessments to having students feel caught up. I teach about 120 students at Pinkerton, and I've had a bunch of parents email me and say that their children are overwhelmed with all the work and they're emotionally having a tough time. This might be the time to modify expectations a little bit and be willing to kind of give some alternative assignments. Give them a chance to feel that they can get caught up, and that will get them engaged, and that's really the most important thing. And then the final one is motivation. They just don't want to do it. Well, that can also honestly come down to a situation of the work needs to be done or the grade is just going to suffer. What I personally find is if you meet all the other ones, the kids that are just not doing the work just because they refuse to do it and no one's going to make them do it, you're just not going to have quite as many. Okay. I'm going to pause for a minute. Let me see. I would love to engage all my learners through a doc assignment they can work on together and thus help each other. I tried to do this in Google Classroom in an assignment, but it didn't work. Can you go over the correct steps? So I guess for this one, what I would suggest, you said you tried to do this in Google Classroom in an assignment, but it didn't work. Could you go over the correct steps? That's a tricky one. One thing I would do is perhaps not have, I would perhaps not have the entire class work on one document. I would put them in groups and set very clear guidelines. So if they're working on a document today, for example, and they need to write an introduction to a review of a book, for example, tell them, okay, by this date, you all need to have contributed to it. I would sort of go put it that way, give certain deadlines and have them in small groups. I think that might help a little bit. And also going in and checking in at the end of each, checking the revision history, seeing who's added into it, who's not, and reach out to them. That's one thing I would say. And will the PowerPoint, yeah, okay. How do you make sure students are doing their work? I'm overwhelmed with grading as I feel it's the only way I can assess the engagement. One thing that I do is I do a lot of project-based learning, and there's usually checkpoints for every day, and they have to turn that in, and I check to make sure it's been done, and I check it on Google Classroom. That's what I do. I usually grade it for completion, not necessarily being perfectly correct. Every few I will grade it for being reasonably correct, but that's what I try to do. I try to give maybe one assignment that covers a bunch of smaller components versus 3 tiny components. It makes it a little less overwhelming. All right, so I think we've answered those questions, so we can keep on moving on. All right, so here's the big things to remember within when we're going to be checking with our students. Set a schedule. That's what I do. Monday is when I sort of check everyone's work and figure out who I need to email. I usually email the parents Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning. And about Tuesday, I will email any administrators, counselors that I'm concerned about. I don't always email every kid's counselor. It really depends on the situation. I usually give it a day or two, and then I will call parents. Always stay positive, but also don't be afraid to be straightforward with your parent. Like if this is becoming a serious issue, don't be afraid to say that, but always approach it from the standpoint of I'm concerned because of this. And that usually helps. And the final one is relationships matter. And this is one thing I feel very, very strongly about. Getting students to engage with you, especially in remote learning, it'll become very critical that you build a positive relationship with them. And we're going to kind of talk about that in the next couple slides. All right, so this is the hard question that we always have to ask ourselves is if you have a class and there's a large number of students who are not doing a specific assignment and you just can't get them to do it and it's a major struggle, one thing we do need to consider, is there a better way to get them to accomplish this instructional goal? And how can I make this more doable? So for example, I have a class that getting them to submit their work is challenging, is probably the kind way to say that. So I may have one vision on how I want them to do this assignment, but the reality is they're just not going to do it the way that I wanted to. So what I end up having to do is I think of how can I get them to actually want to do this, even, and maybe perhaps be a little more flexible on my instructional goal. And that works for me very well. For example, I teach Spanish. We want to compare, we have to learn how to compare things. So I actually let them choose any songs that they want and start comparing them. Of course, what teenager doesn't want to listen to music? So that sort of gets them more interested, and that's a way to sort of have the hook for the instructional goal, just to kind of give you a general example. Right, this is just a video that I would encourage you watch at some point. If anyone's familiar with Rita Pearson, she talks about the fact that every kid needs a champion. Every kid needs someone who believes in them, who sees their value as a human and an individual. Right now with remote learning, our students are stressed. They don't know what's going on with the world around them. I've had students who've told me family members are sick. They need you to check in with them and also see them as people. And that will make a lot of headway in trying to get work done. And so again, before you move on, are there any questions? Does anyone have having any specific successes so far for engaging learners? Anything at all? Any tricks that they've sort of figured out that have worked well? Anything good that they're using in Google Classroom? Feel free to share any of your successes that you've had here. You can type them down below. I know some of my colleagues, they like to send messages through Google Classroom. When someone submits their assignment, they can say, hey, good job, thank you for turning that in. I use Screencastify for my YouTube channel. That works really well. I like that. Once I had one student passing in work, I asked them to help others, call others. That helped. That works really well, and that develops a lot of agency in the classroom. I think that works really well. Okay, do you have suggestions for engaging apps to use with students? Remind, a lot of students like, that way they can text the teacher if they have any questions. Zoom with screen share works to help clarify confusion. I absolutely agree. Zoom with screen share is great. I personally prefer Zoom over Google Hangouts. I try to speak to everyone in every period through Zoom. I like that. And what I like about that is that builds a positive relationship between you and them that's not necessarily tied to their grade. Because many times when we email, it's about, hey, you didn't do this. Well, you know what? Maybe being able to talk to them about more than their content area is a good thing. YouTube videos have been great. I like that. I like the idea that you're doing short YouTube videos because that allows them to actually process the information. Putting videos on how to. Doing less is better. I absolutely agree. That's one thing as we get into the assessments, you're going to hear me say a lot. Really try to focus on what the core goal is here, and less is more, quality over quantity. Perfect. When I make assignments very small, include a document for each child, more of them respond. I like that. I have tried Google Meet. I still prefer Zoom, to be honest with you. Zoom also, you can record yourself just by yourself, and you can actually upload it to YouTube. Zoom whiteboard while in a meeting is great to help, especially math. Suggestions for asynchronous with no ability to communicate with students other than email. Oh my goodness. Very specific directions are necessary for this. If you want to email me, I can give you an example of my agenda that I give to my students. I do a synchronous class, but my agenda is set up so students can do it asynchronously. I think that's where hopefully it is. So that would be my suggestion. If you're going to do that, your directions need to be extremely clear, and I would also encourage you to have a little less content to sort of help them get into the rhythm of things. Tips for live instruction, engaging digital activities. I would start simple. If you're doing Zoom, make sure you set the norms so they completely understand what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. I would start with smaller chunks, like 15-ish minutes of you talking to them and doing some activities to sort of help them through that and help you sort of figure it out. All right. I made a schedule, what days we're meeting. I like that. All right, so I like that, having a participation grade for joining Zoom. We do that at Pinkerton. We need to let them know 24 hours in advance if they need to be there. Oh, I like that. I like, Denise, how you're doing multiple options here. I have some students that like to come into the classroom and talk to me and work and talk to me while they do. I have some that like to do it on their own. Clear expectations, I like that. Yep, just understand as everything is open resources. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the assessments. Oh, Ava, I'm sorry. Hopefully you're getting better audio now. If not, maybe you can call in using the phone number.
Yeah, there were quite a few people who are saying they're having, spotty reception on the audio part. In the chat section is the phone number that you can call in, so you can just call on your phone and watch the video at the same time. So
okay,
I'm texting. I see that.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, ways for kids to interact with me and each other through the digital version of hands-on activities. Oh my goodness. There's some. So Amy, if you're thinking about some digital ways to kind of interact, there are, if you're thinking of verbally or audio, there's Flipgrid that some people use. There's VoiceThread that can also be done. Parlay and Padlet can be used to have discussions and collaborate a little bit. But those are the main ways I can think of for that one. I think every assignment should have the first one dozen as an example, or every writing assignment must have an example. All right, those are good ideas. Okay. So I believe we're good to keep going. All right, so we're on this one. Tips to developing effective online assessments. Pretty much the essentials are they need to be simple, flexible, and familiar. And it's a bonus if you can offer some choice and make them interesting. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so keep it simple. Aim to combine skills into one assessment or task. Avoid multiple logins or downloads. Kind of what I was talking about before is you want to make it as simple as possible for students to access it. Sometimes I'll hear colleagues say, oh, they won't do it, but then when I talk, it's about 2 or 3 different steps. The simpler it is, the higher the odds they're going to do it. And we can go to the next one. So keeping it simple, keep it focused on one task and just expect a higher level of mastery. Do activities kids can access with one link. Quizzes and Kahoot are very popular ones for one link type process. And the next one. So these are simple assessment assignment examples that are low tech. I personally love technology, but I'm all for low tech. It makes everyone's life a lot easier. So Google Classroom, you can post a question to Google Classroom, kids answer, give their opinions, and to respond to each other. It's not the most innovative, but it works. A written assignment, you give the prompt, the task, kids take a picture and upload it. And also, to be very honest, is our students are spending a lot of time on computers. So the fact that you let them take paper and pen is a good thing. It gets their eyes off the screen for a little bit. If you're doing a speaking assessment, kids can record their response using a voice memo and turn it in. You can also set up a Google Voice. And a reading assessment, you can ask kids to read an excerpt and give their opinion in either the first or second format. At the end, I do have a toolkit of resources of easy tech tools that I will share with you. I shared them in the last webinar I did. All right. Allow multiple ways to complete an assignment, consider the student learning curve, and I like project-based learning for flexibility. I think this also addresses the fact that the kids are going to be using a lot of the resources that are out there most likely. So a lot of the assessments that we give should allow for a little bit of flexibility and probably use some hands-on learning approaches. So we can actually have them really apply it and just assume that they're going to be using resources. I also believe in giving them options. The options allow some of your unengaged learners to realize they have a choice in how they do this. And this is going to get them a little bit more interested. The other thing we really need to be careful about is consider our student learning curve. They're adjusting to this as well as we are. And that's a challenge for all of us. Okay. All right, I'm going to check the questions quickly. All right, I like Denise's. I created a document for each student in the classroom with specific directions to report what they do for class each day. I return the documents and add to it. That's a good one. That works well, because then if you are a student who's confused on the content, you get that feedback very well. And how does the voice memo and turn it in work? Well, on phones, students can just record themselves speaking, and they can go on Google Classroom and submit the audio file. You just also need to make sure that you're following your school's legal procedures and have their permission forms for audio and video recording for that. And then speaking assessment. All right, so speaking assessments, what you could do is, I teach Spanish, but you could do it anything. You could ask them to explain a certain concept to you, explain the difference between two scientific procedures, and they could explain it to you in a voice memo, the differences between them. They could record themselves and turn it in. It would be a little bit easier instead of them typing something else, and you could listen to it. So the voice memo is on most people's phones. If it's an iPhone or an Android, has something like that. And then Flipgrid is probably a webinar in itself, is a program where students can actually record themselves and their classmates can see it as well. All right, so again, keeping it flexible examples are either or assignments. These are assignments where I say, okay, I want you to show me the difference between A and B. You can do this by doing this, and by doing this, and the students get to choose. That usually helps the unengaged learners because they can sort of pick their battle. Allow multiple ways to turn in an assignment. Maybe they can do it on Google Docs. Maybe they can write on a piece of paper and take a picture. Be considerate with their confusion. It's like what we talked about before. There could be other stuff going on. They may simply not know what you want them to do because they're not teachers, and they're stressed, and they're between 15 and 18 or younger. And I like project-based learning just because you can break it up into smaller chunks. They turn each deliverable in every day, and they finally put it all together. All right, this one I actually think is really important. I think this is actually kind of one of the most important ones, is keep it familiar. Stay with your style and follow content that makes sense for you. So if you are a very low-tech teacher, trying to implement every single new technology that has been offered to us for free is probably going to drive you crazy, and it's probably going to drive your students crazy. Try to stick with things that make sense with what you do in the classroom. You already have the tools to do this. You're just going to be doing it in a slightly different way. And also try to follow the content in a way that makes sense. You know, you don't need to do what your colleague's doing if you're doing something else. Try to really do what makes sense for you. As I like to say, you know your students and your students know you. They will know if you give an assignment that makes sense for you. All right, the next thing is, these are sort of the bonus ones, implementing choice. Students are able to choose their difficulty. That helps. Give them options on questions and tasks to complete, and it also gives them a sense of control. If we think about what's going on right now, our teenagers have had everything upended on them. So giving them assessments where they have some form of control over it will make them feel a lot better. So for example, if you're a math teacher and you want to have them do some problems, you can give them options. Assume, okay, all these 5 problems are moderately difficult. Pick 2 to do, and then they get to pick. They're still accomplishing the goal that you want them to do, but they're choosing how they want to do it. And that makes a big difference for a lot of students. So ways to implement choice and get what you want. Choice boards I know are popular with a lot of teachers. I do them. For example, you can give 5 tasks and ask them to complete 3. And then open-ended questions work really well. Open-ended questions actually work really well from a pure assessment point of view, because if you ask an open-ended question, they have to really explain their thought process. So copying and pasting will be really hard in this one, and it will start getting very obvious if 2 students have the exact same answer. So I find open-ended questions work really well in that regard. So the next thing is, how can I really make this interesting? For remote learning, our students are at their houses, and the things I hear from them is they're bored and they want to do something interesting. So reflect on them. What can they realistically do? If you have a high achieving class, you can probably have them log into a new site you want to check out. Everything's going to go great. You have an okay class. You might want to still try something, but keep it a little more moderate. And if you have a class that struggles, your assessment might have to be very straightforward, and that's okay. Don't be afraid to also add humor into things, okay? Do something that will make them laugh, and don't be afraid to do something a little bit different. The reality is we've been pushed into remote learning rather quickly, and we have not really had the time to prepare. So this is going to be a little bit of a learning curve for all of us. So do what you can to sort of make these assessments interesting and just sort of hopefully engage them. Okay. Yes, I'm going to pause just for a minute on questions. Submit as an attachment. Yes, that should work. Okay, I am a science teacher. This could be useful. Yes, I have found, actually, I recommended that to some math and science teachers I've known, and they've said it's worked really well. It's also worked pretty well in some English classes and some history classes, because they had them explain the events that led up to a battle. And some of their students who really struggled with writing were really able to articulate all the events that led up to it and the causes and the aftermath. So it's just a different way. And if you think about it, for our students that struggle, this is another way for them to show their understanding. All right, so here are my general strategies. Give different versions of assessments. Don't be afraid to do that. If you're having to give like a pretty much a right and a wrong, a true and false, you can make different versions of an assessment and send it to them. I personally like using Google Forms, but actually Google now does Google Forms. You can turn them into a quiz and it will automatically grade it for you. So you can send those to students. For open-ended assessments, I use what I call the creativity rule. So I'm a foreign language teacher, so kids will use online dictionaries. So what I tell students is if you are looking up a word, I want you to bold it and tell me where you found it. So they're pretty much acknowledging they've used a resource outside the notes and outside the materials that I gave them. And then if a student does an entire thing, obviously using outlined resources, it turns into a conversation of, should this really be turned in? I've known teachers in other content areas who've done similar things, and what it does is it lets the students be honest if they're using outside information or if they collaborated with other students. And then if you don't want them to do it, you tell them, I can't accept this. But you've at least given them the opportunity to tell you, be honest with you. Have students write on a paper and take a picture. I like this one because it's really hard to copy and paste that way. Check revision history on Google. You can really tell if you go into Google Docs how long it took someone to do something, and that can be useful. One thing in the previous webinar is we had a teacher who gave I believe it was a math quiz, and it was a timed assessment. So they all had to show up in Zoom, and they all had to turn on their, excuse me, not their mic. They all had to turn on their video. And essentially they had 15 minutes to take the quiz, and they wrote it on a piece of paper, and they were being videoed the entire time. So the teacher could generally tell if they were using any resources or if they were just doing it. And then the kids took a picture and turned it in. That works as well if you need to. All right. And next slide, please. All right, so before we begin, are there any questions on assessments? We're pretty much right on schedule. My goal for today was to hopefully have anyone share any successes they're having with assessments and or share any questions that they have. Okay, suggest draft feedback on Google Doc. That's a good idea. Any other questions or suggestions in regarding assessments? Looking for ideas for math assessments. Let me see. Yeah, some of these ideas, like the ones I've suggested for you, hopefully will help. I find for the math, what some of my colleagues are doing is they give them like a choice board for math problems, and they sort of figure, okay, these are some easy, these are some mediums, these are some hard, and they have them work on it on a piece of paper, and they take a picture and turn it in. That's what I've heard a lot of them doing. And sometimes what they're doing is they'll also say, okay, we want you to do numbers 1 through 5, and then about 2 or 3 hours later, they'll post the answers, and the kids have to go back and fix their mistakes. Those are other options as well. It's not ideal because you'd rather be in the classroom and getting to see them do it, but that works as well. All right, I'm a math teacher, and I'm teaching conic sections right now. I plan to assess them by having them create the questions to graph. Oh, I like that idea. It's a really good idea. Good ideas there, Suzanne.
Could you read that out loud?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm a math teacher, and I'm teaching conic sections right now. I plan to assess them by having them create the questions to graph. I really like that idea.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions or suggestions for the group here? Oh, there's more. I'm a math teacher, and I use code cogs in conjunction with Google Forms. That's interesting. I've never heard that. We use the same assessment for 3. For math, I create my own and scan it and then upload it into Google Classroom. Okay. Are there any specific foreign language sites that help with assessments? Ooh, that's a good one. I personally use quizzes, the ones that I showed earlier. That's the one that I prefer. I use Google Forms, Google Quizzes. I use things like that. And I also tend to do a lot of dictations, I'll say something in Spanish. They have to write it on a piece of paper and take a picture. Okay. And they will need to create one of each of the 4 equations instead of me giving the equations. I like that. We use the same assessment for 2 to 3 different classes. We are finding students are sharing the test with their friends. Other than the new version for each class, are there any other suggestions? Oof. Other than a new version for each class, are there any other suggestions? I honestly would do just new versions for each class. That's what I would suggest. That's probably the best one. Any math teachers, feel free to chime in on there in that one. You could also look at their processes. Well, I suppose they might be solving the problem very similar to other people, but something like that might help there. Can you explain the attendees comment? Oh, can you comment you read about Google Forms and something else? So the Google Forms, let me see if I can find that. My colleagues, if you can help me with that too. If you see,
Yeah.
I have to go.
Yeah, I'm looking for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll keep on going through while we find that. Thank you. Okay, Go Formative is great for making math assessments and worksheets. That's great.
I found it. It's Code Cogs in
Okay.
conjunction with Google Forms.
Okay.
And there's
Code
also
Cogs.
something called Desmos for graphing equations. Desmos.
Okay.
SMOS.
Google Form has a rotating feature. So you make the quiz and it changes the quiz. That's good information. It changes the quiz questions. That can help. I make them explain the steps in solving the problems. I have a better idea that they understood the process. Oh, it was Code Cogs. Perfect. Thank you so much, Kevin. Yeah, I like those ideas there because then they're going to have to explain the processes. So I personally, in this one, would suggest having them really explain how they knew how to solve it. And then don't be afraid to have a couple different versions roaming around there. All right, are there any other questions? All right, so these are just sort of my toolkit of items that I use. Good meeting software sites. One is Zoom, GoToMeeting, and Google Hangouts. I personally prefer Zoom and GoToMeeting. Both of these can be easily recorded. Zoom, you can do a screen share, you can mute them upon entry, same with GoToMeeting. So those are the main ones that I tend to use. Good sample sites for formative assessments, quizzes, you can host live games and homework with a link. Socrative is one that could also work pretty well if you're giving it a live assessment because the kids go online, they take it, they put in a room code and it shuffles the questions. So it would be really hard for kids to sort of share answers along the way. In Socrative, you can also ask open-ended questions and you can go later and grade it. Quizlet is good for study sets. It's a great way. I think a lot of us know it already. Personally, if you're really concerned about sharing answers, Socrative's probably not a bad way to go. The only thing with it, it has to usually be a live assessment. And our next slide. All right, good sites for discussion. Parlay. Pretty much you post a link, you post a question, kids can respond. Flipgrid, kids either love it or hate it. It is a site where you can record and explain your answers. If you want to have them explain some kind of scientific process or some event in history, they could record themselves describing it, and then they can actually have a student respond to them. Google Classroom, you can post a question, kids answer. It's as simple as that. It's not particularly exciting, but it does the job. Padlet is, I believe, I've been told it is free now, but it's been crashing a little bit lately. It is a good program, but it works the same as Parlay. You can post a question, give them a link, and they can respond. If you do Padlet, make sure you get to approve whatever they post. With Padlet, you have the ability to do that. The last two, the first one is Vocaroo. It's a very easy recording software. It's a website that you can go to and you can click on it and you literally record at the website. You get a hyperlink and then you can copy and paste the hyperlink. That is very, very, very easy to do. Beyond voice memo, it's their easiest recorder out there. They literally just go to the site. It's very easy. The last one is Screencastify, which has already been mentioned, and that one allows you to record your screen. I also use Screencast-O-Matic as well, and Zoom also lets you record your screen, and then I upload it to YouTube, and I give an unlisted link for my students to sort of see. So, yeah, Pilot really is really free. You only get 2 pilots and then they charge you. So does anyone have any questions or anything that I can help with? I don't think we have any more questions.
Awesome. Lindsay, thank you so much. I learned a ton. Thank you.
Right,
Thank you everyone for all of your questions. It's nice to see all this interaction as we're home by ourselves. It's nice when teachers come together. So what's next for us through the Department of Ed is we have a number of virtual learning webinars coming up, which you can see on the slide. This webinar will be recorded. It is being recorded and will be found on demonstratedsuccess.com under virtual learning. And again, if you have any questions, definitely reach out, email us, and that's it for today. Thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Lindsay. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Let me add one thing. Within a couple hours, we'll send you a link to all these things, to all the documents and the link to the video and the certificate. And that should be done in 2 hours. We always say that. We never know if it really gets there, but we will do it. You'll get it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.